What if Earth had rings like Saturn? Saturn is one of the most beautiful planets in our solar system, with its gorgeous set of rings that has fascinated humans for centuries. And I can't help but wonder, what if Earth had rings like Saturn? We're going to explore this idea and find out what would happen if we took Saturn's rings and placed them around our planet. Would they be useful or just plain dangerous? Let's dive in. In order to answer this question, we need to learn more about Saturn's rings. They are not solid structures like many people think. In fact, these rings are opaque and only a few miles wide. We know this because spacecraft have flown through them and even landed on them. They're so thin that you could fit several of them between the pages of a book. And even though they might look frozen, they were actually made up of trillions of tiny pieces of rock and dust that are flying around at high speeds. Each rock is called a shard, and it's constantly crashing into all the other shards, creating an incredible amount of friction. This friction generates heat and causes the rocks to glow a brilliant blue color. Some of the rocks are even hot enough to melt. So although these rings are pretty, they're not exactly a comfortable place to hang out. But let's pretend that we can magically make Earth have rings just like Saturn's. How big would these rings be? The largest ring that Saturn has is called the ring. It's the brightest and also the widest, stretching for almost 75,000 miles. That's wider than the entire United States, and yes, Saturn has more than one ring. In fact, it has more than a dozen major rings that are divided into smaller sections. The rings are named alphabetically, with the ring being the outermost and the innermost set of rings being called the D rings. If we put one of Saturn's rings around Earth, it would look very different from how it looks around Saturn. That's because the size of a planet affects the way that its rings appear. For example, Saturn is nearly 10 times larger than Earth, so its rings appear much larger as well. If we shrink down Saturn's rings to fit around Earth, they wouldn't be much bigger than the Moon. But don't worry, I'm not suggesting that Earth will ever have rings that big. In fact, I'm thinking even smaller. Imagine if we took the smallest ring that Saturn has and put it around our planet. It would still look pretty impressive, like something straight out of a science fiction movie. Plus, this ring would be much less dangerous than the larger ones because it would be made of giant chunks of rock. Instead, it would be made of much smaller pieces that would cause as much damage when they hit Earth. So what would happen if we put a small ring like this around our planet? Well, it depends on where we put it. If we put it too close to Earth, it would start to affect our planet's gravity and pull everything towards the center of the planet. This would make Earth a bit wider at the equator, and it would also affect the length of a day. The Earth's rotation would slow down and the planet would wobble a bit on its axis. And if we put the ring too far away from Earth, it would start to wobble our planet's orbit around the sun. This would make summers and winters more extreme, and it would also affect the length of a year. But let's say we find the perfect spot for the ring, somewhere where it doesn't affect Earth's rotation or orbit. What then? Well, the first thing that would happen is that the ring would start to decay. Yes, rings aren't stable structures, they're always breaking apart and reforming in new shapes. If a piece of rock gets too close to a planet, it can get sucked in by its gravity. Once it crosses a certain point called the Roche limit, the gravitational force of the planet is stronger than the gravitational force of the ring. At that point, the rock will start to break apart into smaller pieces until it is no longer bound to the ring. This is why Saturn's rings are opaque instead of solid. It's also why they're so thin. Over billions of years, the rocks have been pulled into the planet and the rings have had time to spread out. If we put a ring around Earth, the same thing would happen. The rocks would eventually be pulled in by our planet's gravity and turn Earth into a bigger and heavier planet. Now, don't worry, this process would take millions of years, so we have plenty of time to prepare. But it's important to remember that the more massive a planet is, the stronger its gravity. And that means that if we put a ring around Earth, our planet's gravity would eventually become strong enough to pull in even bigger rocks. Pretty soon, Earth would be growing larger and larger until it was hundreds or even thousands of times bigger than its original size. At some point, the gravitational force of Earth would become so strong that it would start to attract other objects in space, like asteroids and comets. Our planet would quickly become a true gas giant with a mass so large that it would suck in any nearby rocks and dust. The Earth's core would be under enormous pressure and heat, which would cause it to collapse in on itself. All of the planet's mass would be squished together and Earth would become a massive ball of rock and metal. The entire surface of the planet would be covered in volcanoes and earthquakes, and the atmosphere would be filled with toxic gases. Earth would become a very inhospitable place, even for microorganisms. But wait, there's more. As Earth grew larger, its gravity would start to affect the moon's orbit. Eventually, the moon would be pulled in by our planet's gravity and crash into it. The impact would be catastrophic, causing massive earthquakes and tsunamis. The moon's impact would also cause Earth's orbit to wobble, which would change the length of a year and the severity of seasons. Summers would be hotter and winters would be colder. There would be more extreme weather events like hurricanes, tornadoes, and floods. And the moon wouldn't be the only object affected by Earth's new gravity. The orbits of all the other planets in the solar system would be slightly altered. Mars would come closer to Earth and Venus would move away from us. But perhaps the most interesting thing about having a ring around Earth is that it would make the planet look twice as big in the sky. Just imagine opening your curtains in the morning and seeing a giant ring of rocks circling our planet. It would be an amazing sight, even if it meant that the sun only shone half as brightly in the sky and we had to deal with more extreme weather. So as you can see, having rings like Saturn around Earth would have a lot of negative consequences. The rocks would eventually be pulled into our planet, turning Earth into a massive ball of rock and metal. The moon would crash into Earth, and the orbits of all the other planets in the solar system would be altered. But hey, at least we have a cool view from Earth. Now, I've got a question for you. Do you think that rings around Earth would be more trouble than they're worth? Or do you think that the cool view would be worth the inconvenience? Let me know in the comments below. While you're at it, why not learn more about the real-life rings of Saturn? NASA's Cassini spacecraft has been orbiting Saturn for over a decade and has taken incredible photos of the planet's rings. If you want to learn more about these amazing structures, check out the resources provided. You can learn about the different types of rings that Saturn has, as well as the latest discoveries about these fascinating features. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed learning about what would happen if Earth had rings like Saturn. Don't forget to subscribe so you never miss an exciting episode. And be sure to visit our website to learn more about the amazing planet Saturn. I'll see you next time.